Hi, welcome to Naked Man Blogging, and yes, I am an actual naked man blogging. Your host, just call me Naked Man. Today's subject is a medical subject I would like to talk about. In the past I've talked about such issues as cancer. As a survivor, it's kind of an upfront issue for me. But today's disease I'm going to talk about is foot in mouth. It is a common affliction for the citizen all over the world, no matter where he's from. In particular, though, we notice it when it is a nationally syndicated radio show host, like Don Imus. Many of you don't know, but I actually have my own radio show. I do rock and roll radio in Southern Illinois. And as the official bro of rock and roll, in a community that is anything but, well, of the community that I represent as an ethnic minority, I am very careful about what I say on the radio. I tend to make it about the music and not about politics in particular. Although I will rant on politics in general, things that I think the community will say are fundamental issues to our survival. And I'm willing to discuss my views with anybody via email, and people in general tend to agree with me. Because I choose my subjects pretty safely. I'm not in talk radio. Mr. Imus, on the other hand, is in talk radio, and he tends to stick a large foot in his mouth occasionally with that recent comment about the football player where he said, and what I heard basically insinuated that because of that person's race, his behavior was to be expected, or at least that was the behavior that would be expected from that race, which I think those two things mean similar but different things. And now, of course, everybody's all riled up. Al Sharpton, the typical media hounds are jumping on Don Imus, and I think that there is some room for righteous indignation that Don Imus would say the things he says on radio, but I also believe in the Constitution. And I believe that as long as it is not indecent, as determined by the Supreme Court, you know, Don Imus can stick his foot in his mouth any way he wants to. And if you choose to listen, that's on you. If you choose to advertise, that's on you. Of course, if you choose to jump up and down and say he's a freaking racist, that's on you as well. But don't expect everybody to line up behind you to go hang Don Imus, because he has basically exercised his free speech. He just happened to do it with a foot in his mouth. Now, a lot of people are calling for his termination. They'll probably spin in the fact that, well, he's on the public airwaves. Well, those same people wouldn't want anybody to mediate their speech. And even though Don Imus claims he was saying something else, or that because of his last issue, he speaks more on race issues than anybody, despite that, he still stuck his foot in his mouth. That's who he is. Don Imus seems to be, or pardon me as I say in my day job, appears to be a bigot. Well, guess what? The country does not outlaw bigots from anything. They outlaw bigotry when it impacts the ability of the target of the bigotry to move forward with the American dream. Other than that, if his boss says it's okay and doesn't fire him, so be it. Just don't listen to Don Imus. I don't listen to Don Imus. People don't listen to my radio show because they don't like classic rock and roll. I'm sure there's some people that don't listen to it because I'm tall, or some people don't listen to it because I have a voice that is deep and, you know, whatever. But that's their choice. And I really think we should spend more time focusing on other things than Don Imus and his big mouth. That actually plays into the Don Imus game. You know what? I hadn't even heard from Don Imus lately until he said that stupid comment. And I actually think that Don Imus might do this stuff just to generate some excitement in his show. I absolutely guarantee you that more people listen to Don Imus the day after he stuck his foot in his mouth than the day before. Now, that's a lot of people, I admit, and maybe some people ascribe to what Don Imus said, but that's them. And fortunately, I don't have to listen to either Don Imus or those people. And I would suggest that you have the same ability to either turn the dial on or turn the dial off without having to spend any energy saying, bad Don, bad Don. I mean, Don Imus, I personally think he's a jerk. You might think he's a great guy. But the bottom line is, whether he's a great guy or a jerk, that is his right under the American dream to be. He can be anything he wants to be. And as long as the broadcasting company that pays his check, he has the ability to do that on air. And personally, I don't think anybody should call in and say, bad Don, fire him. Why were you listening to him anyways? And if you're going to live on the media bites that have played this over and over and over, get a life. Because there are better things to do. You know, better things to do would be remembering somebody like George Carlin. Because George Carlin sort of ties into this sideways because of the 7 words, the 7 dirty words that took him all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court upheld broadcasters' rights and the federal government's rights to restrict those words from their content because they're quote-unquote obscene. Well, so be it. Obscenity, I think there is some purpose in regulating obscene broadcast, because we don't, as I mentioned earlier, have control over who might be listening, although they have control over whether they're listening or not. So, you know, today the pendulum is still swinging up to that place where we regulate 7 words. That's all we do, is we regulate 7 words. And there may be some regulation on the periphery of those 7 words, how certain other words are used if they imply the 7 words. And you know what? I think that's a good thing, because at some point, if you want to be a crass jerk, you know, like Howard Stern or Don Imus, well, Don Imus, let me retract that. Don Imus he might be a crass jerk, but Howard Stern is a whole nother level of crass jerkness. But you can go on to one of those services where people can pay to hear you being a crass jerk. You know, people that listen to Howard Stern, you know, very few of them complain, and he could say anything. But I would have to say, even though Howard Stern is a crass jerk that abuses minorities, abuses people that are, how would you say, challenged physically and mentally, he does it in a fashion that seems to generate a loyal fan base, and of course the people that paid Howard appreciate that loyal fan base. And he does it on cable for a big bag of money. I wish Naked Man Blogging would get 1/10 of that big money to say stuff. I would do a show with just naked people. I would do it naked, just for the heck of it. And occasionally I would stand up and they would do that little thing where they fuzz out my nipples, or my like my family chest of jewels, my Romanov eggs, whatever you want to call them. But more power to the people that have got themselves where they got themselves. I would just say, if you don't like it, move on. George Carlin, rest in peace, brother. You were a pioneer. And you were a guy that could say stuff that was basically crass, but it was funny. But you didn't do it in a hurtful way. And I think George Carlin was a model that a lot more people should follow. Sure, maybe he was a little crasser than other comedians, but he was one of the best. Again, rest in peace, George Carlin. And I guess in closing, may a building fall on Don Imus. My opinion, if you love him, more power to you. I don't hate you for doing that. I am Naked Man Blogging. I am out of here.